And then before we get started, all I want to do is introduce our facilitators. So this workshop is facilitated by Miss Toya Foster. Toya is a licensed professional counselor who provides comprehensive psychological care for couples and individuals. Toya is Gottman Level 2 trained and works with expertise in trust recovery, rebuilding relationships, family of origin issues, and anxiety and emotional support for life's challenges. Toya believes in the potential of what has been broken or hurt to be healed in a safe, supportive, and non-judgmental environment. And without further ado, Toya, take it away.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you, Lizzie. The most supportive team ever. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining Holistic Co-Parenting, which is a free workshop that I'm offering as part of Care Week. This is something that's really special to my own heart because I went through a divorce and didn't have any good modeling for co-parenting, and what I knew from my friends about the co-parenting relationships that they had, they weren't all that good, and I wanted something better. And so I did a lot of research and tried a lot of things, and this is something that I help couples that I work with that end up deciding to split, develop, or consider or work on. So here we go. The quality of the relationship between co-parents has a very strong influence on the mental and emotional well-being of children. And let's just be honest, and the incidence of anxiety and depression for them. Of course, putting aside relationship issues, right, the things that cause the relationship to break up is easier said than done. Co-parenting is probably agreeably one of the hardest things that you might have to do in relationship with a partner that you've just split with. But I do want to say, unless your family has faced, serious issues like domestic violence or substance abuse, co-parenting is going to be much more difficult because it might not be possible to have both parents play an active role in your children's daily lives for maybe good reason. And so while the presentation that I'm about to offer is talking about having two people that are agreeable and that want to show up in a co-parenting way with their children, and just keep in mind that there are some instances where this may not be possible. Okay. Divorced parents or separated parents almost always find the issue of co-parenting one of the stickiest challenges for their new and uncharted relationship. In virtually almost every case, the children suffer as a result of divorce. There's no two ways around it. The children will suffer. They've grown up maybe all of their lives. It doesn't matter how old they were, from 2 years old to 15 years old, having a secure base, which included two parents, mom and dad, mom and mom, or dad and dad, two parents. And so they will endure some suffering as a result. They feel torn between two parents and the parents' now separate lives. Mom and dad, or the parents, also struggle with feelings of competitiveness and frustration and misunderstanding. Additionally, there's the added pressure of needing to co-parent from two different households, which isn't what people signed up for when you decide to have kids. You're never envisioning a time when you'll be doing it separately or independently of one another. And almost everything about co-parenting is fraught with challenges. And yet, in many cases, parents and children do adapt to the change and hopefully find a way to successfully co-parent after a separation or the breakup of a relationship. And that's sort of what we're going to talk about today. There is only one family that endures a recalibration and expansion, and it demands that the parents accomplish the necessary growth and emotional maturation to elegantly execute such a transition, rather than expecting the children to do so. This was adapted from a book by Dr. Constance Aarons, and she wrote a book that's called The Good Divorce. It demonstrated that it's not so much the divorce itself. It could be, right? It could be an acrimonious or uncreative way that the divorce and how we've set up divorce in the society, that we've gone about it. that our kids get hurt, but even amicable divorces may be getting it wrong. Because anytime we create two separate families where there once was one, we're setting our children up to experience some suffering. Expecting them to go from family to family is essentially asking them to be in a perpetual state of longing and loss, always having to say goodbye to one family in order to join the other. And I know this from experience that it was difficult for my kids to be able to say goodbye to me and say hi to dad. And when they were at dad's, they wanted to be home. And when they were with me, they would talk about their dad. Children pine for their parents to get back together. I've been divorced now 10 years. And my son still says, "Are you and dad ever going to get back together?" They're yearning for wholeness, in their changed and fragmented worlds, and it's our job to help make that their world and their lives less fragmented, and to offer them the opportunity to feel what they feel in a safe environment, and to create an environment in which they can thrive with both parents. Creating the happily even after. So even if you're not friends, even if the relationship was not a forever fit, even if it's hard and impossible to imagine, like how we're going to make this happen, even if you're entrenched in grief and shame or loss, and even if you don't want to, each person in a relationship has the power to choose a co-parenting partnership that reflects and expresses their best self. Your children demand it, and your fully healed and less hurting self, less sad self, less angry self will ultimately be grateful for it. Talking about creating a co-parenting plan and then implementing it is the difference between chaos and suffering and family and joy. It is possible to maintain and in many cases create the family system that works for your family, for the parents and the kids. And what I mean here is that sometimes our family system feels really hard, like the relationship between the two parents is not the best, right? Maybe there's lots of arguments or lots of tension or lots of chaos, or maybe, the marriage has just run its course and, both of you are thinking that this relationship may not hold on very long. If you're feeling that way and you have kiddos underfoot, then they are probably experiencing the energy from that, or hearing and seeing the arguments. Because we teach our kids, after all, don't fight with each other, don't argue, don't say those mean things, don't raise your voice. And yet they experience or see us doing that to each other. And so sometimes breaking up, right, the relationship, but increasing the family or supporting the family system can be better in terms of the energy in the house, the friendship that's available to everyone, just like in this picture. If you can imagine, the couple in this picture are no longer married and they have two kids and they're enjoying being around each other, being in community together. They all have their shoes off. They're having a fun time. Imagine it's a probably sunny day and they're running at the park together. If you can see their faces or their mouths, they're smiling. These are the moments that make differences in the lives of our children and how our children feel about their family. This is the essence of what it means to create a holistic co-parenting partnership, whereby you're keeping the family system intact. So your children, when they think about family, they still think about mom and dad or the parents, right? And they still think about themselves being equally loved and equally in favor with both parents, that they get to spend all the time that they want with either parent. And in order to do this, the adults have to do some work so that they can get to a place where they can do this. That might mean doing work on yourselves by going to therapy, learning to remain calm, consistent, learning how to resolve those conflicts in a different way, learning to make joint or shared custody work, so that you can enable your children not just to survive your divorce, your separation, or the loss of your relationship, but to help them thrive in spite of it. If we are going to help our children know that they will be okay, then we have to be present for the times when things aren't so okay. It's in those times when they learn to trust us with their emotional truth about how they feel about their parents not being in the same house so that we can help them heal. And sometimes it's not just how they feel about their parents not being in the same house. It could be about how they feel when they're away from the other parent, right? I remember that my son used to say, well, I'm afraid that I wanted to come over here and then dad brought me home, but now I'm worried that he's at home and he's lonely, right? And I would say, well, let's find out. And I'd let him get on the phone and I'd say, ask him. And his dad would say, no, no, yes, I miss you, but I'm not lonely. And sometimes my son would say, well, can I see your face so that I'll know? And my husband would drive right back over, ex-husband would drive right back over and say, see my face, like he would do something silly in the window. And my son would say, yes, okay, I see. Says, I'm not lonely. I miss you. And you're always welcome to come and blah, blah, blah. So it's just not easy and we have to help them through it. Of course, sharing the news of a separation or divorce doesn't always mean that it's news for your children, but most times it is. Helping them to come to terms with what this will look like, talking to them about what it feels like for you a little bit, and this could feel like for them can make all the difference in how you prepare them to move forward and how well they will adapt to moving forward, which means showing and modeling your children, what it feels like when you're sad and what's appropriate sadness, what it feels like to be angry and that it's okay to be angry, what it feels like to miss the other parent and the things you can do when you do that. Helping them understand how to be makes them feel safe and secure. This is one of the primary needs that our children have. The most primary need, the highest primary need that our children have is to feel safe and secure. And as parents, that's the job that we offer them above all everything else. We provide them safety and security. Secondary to this is my mom okay? Is my dad okay? Right? They need to know that mom and dad are okay because they're not here. So I can't see and I don't know, I can't tell. After a breakup of a relationship, children don't have the ability to live in a world where there's one agreed upon set of rules and values and beliefs. Suddenly there's two sets of rules, maybe about bedtime, bath time, and brushing your teeth, and how homework gets done and when homework gets done, and can we watch TV? Can we play video games? Table manners, good behavior and bad behavior. We have to take all of that into consideration in helping children understand what that looks like when we're talking to our children about what their life is going to look like is important. To help them by saying, I know how much you love your bed or your bedroom or your stuffed animals, and I'm going to make sure that you have access to them, or I'm going to make sure that I buy the same one so that no matter where you are, you always have Snuggly Wuggly with you at my house or at your second house. Or I'm going to make sure you have your, for me, it was a Power Ranger comforter at my house and at your second house, so that you're always comfortable when you go to bed. Having those conversations to help kids understand that, okay, I'm going to be able to have the same thing. It's going to feel the same when I'm going to sleep at either house is really helpful. So it's over. Now what? The post-breakup couple has a difficult task of terminating the marital relationship while at the same time redefining the parental one, right? Because as soon as you make the decision to separate, right, you got to start working on what does our parental relationship look like? What do we want it to look like? What's going to be possible? More importantly, what do our kids need? Your marriage may be over, but it doesn't mean that your family has to be over. Acting and moving and planning and talking about this with your kids' best interest in mind should be your highest priority. The co-parenting struggle is real, I got to tell you. And according to Pew Research, by the age of 9, more than 1 in 5 children experience a parental breakup. And as a couples counselor, I have to tell you that the number one reason adults come to therapy is to manage family of origin discord. So it could be that my parents separated and they got divorced, or it could be that my parents didn't separate or get divorced, and maybe they should have. But whatever it is, the number one reason that brings adults into therapy is something that happened in their family of origin. And if their parents did get divorced, we can almost always trace it back to how that felt for them, how they maybe observed or noticed or felt one person grieving the loss of that relationship, or one person responding poorly to the loss of that relationship. It's important. The key to successful parenting is to separate your personal relationship, right? The relationship with your ex, from your co-parenting relationship. And it might be helpful to start thinking about your relationship with your ex as a completely new one. This works, trust me. One that's entirely about the well-being of your children and not about either of you. Finding new ways of relating independently with your children while they simultaneously develop new rules and behaviors isn't easy, right? Because not only do the kids have to get used to spending time alone with their parents independently, we have to get used to it too. I remember talking to some of my friends who had been separated and were co-parenting, and they would say the hardest part is knowing what to do with yourself when the kids aren't around, because when we're at home the kids are always around. And they were right. I found that was my toughest time. I wanted to call all the time, and I wanted to know how my kids were doing, and were they hungry, and were they eating good, and were they going to bed on time. But as my ex-partner, and I began to talk about it, I had to learn that I have to be able to trust him. I have to be able to trust in the conversations that we had, that we're going to be on the same page in terms of bedtime and activities for the kids, and that I am allowed to call, but I'm not allowed to smother, and I'm not allowed to do this for not only, to manage my anxiety, but to help the kids. Time is a factor, as it takes the average of 2 to 3 years for the family to adjust and adapt to this new parental structure, this new co-parenting structure, right? Two families in two different houses, and that it assumes that all adults are fully invested in the process and there are no cutoffs. What this means is that you both make an agreement, if you will, to be intentional and deliberate about the ways in which you set up your co-parenting partnership. Because peaceful and consistent and purposeful communication with your ex is essential to the success of co-parenting. Even if it seems impossible, it all begins with your mindset, right? To think about communication with your ex as having the highest priority, being your child's well-being. This is really, really important. There's this concept of binuclear families, right? We have all heard of nuclear families, and that's your primary family system. But I would say probably over the past 3 decades, there's this term that's come about that's called binuclear families, which are very much the norm in our society and many other Western societies as well. Binuclear families revolve around 2 physical locations rather than a nuclear family that revolves around 1. A lot of us have been part of this family system before. So for example, if Uncle Eddie, had to finally move out of my parents' house to get his own apartment at the age of 28, he left his parents' home, even though my dad basically threatened him and kicked him out. He moved to his new home, but it didn't change the fact that he was still part of the family. He lived in a different place, but Uncle Eddie was still part of the family. He was still included. He still felt part of the family. He didn't feel excommunicated. All of those things, when we think about him, we still think of him as part of the family. He just has a different address. The 2 homes are, in fact, 2 different cultures. And because of this, children in binuclear post-divorce families become adept at living in 2 worlds. They're forced to recognize that there's more than one right way to do things, but they still consider my house and their dad's house part of the family. And this matters how the transition happens. The co-parental relationship established and maintained by the parents, it can either benefit or harm the children as they experience the transitions associated with the change. For an example, parents who do this right are considerate of each other and want to maximize the time their children spend with each other and together as a family. Keeping to a schedule that the children can rely on and look forward to is important. This means managing the effects of the ended relationship in a way that the co-parents are friends, really good friends, right? You have to be able to tolerate being around each other and communicating with each other and be authentic in your communications, especially when the kids are around. And friends whose relationships can tolerate dinners together and trips with the family together, continued relationships with your in-laws, right? So because of the ending of your relationship, if you're doing a holistic co-parenting agreement or partnership, it doesn't mean, right, that all of a sudden you don't go to grandma's house anymore, or you don't communicate, with your in-laws. Still sharing shared friends outside of the home, having open communication with schools and doctors and money and financial decisions, just like you would as it pertains to the children and for the sake of the children. Healthy adjustment of children without long-term psychological damage requires that post-breakup parents restructure their lives in ways that allow children to continue the relationship with both parents, right? Healthy adjustment. Successful co-parenting means that your own emotions, anger, resentment, or hurt must take a back seat to the needs of your children. This is, again, easier said than done. But it's important that if the breakup or the resolution of your relationship is not amicable, that you both make an agreement to go to therapy so that you can learn how to put those differences aside or deal with them in therapy so that you can both show up in an organic and holistic, authentic way with each other for the sake of the children, because children will be able to know when you're faking it or when you don't really like each other. And if that's the case, they pick up on that and they begin to fracture, right? They begin to feel like they have to pick one parent or the other. Co-parenting isn't about our feelings or those of our ex-partner, but rather about our child's happiness, stability, and future well-being, right? We can pull this off more easily, or it might require more work depending on the age of our kids. If our kids are young, then we absolutely have to get it together for the sake of the children. If our children are older, or they have memories of maybe how harsh or how bad or how maybe chaotic the relationship was, they may feel more at ease because you're not in the relationship anymore, but they still need the family system. And so maybe not being the best besties, BFFs, might be okay, but still being able to be around each other in a healthy and happy way is important. One thing that co-parents can do is to always drop off your kids at your ex's and never pick them up. This brilliant advice came from a friend of mine who's been divorced since her son was 2, like I was. With this setup, each parent is giving the child to the other parent rather than taking the child away. It's this sort of intentionality that's a gesture of warmth and affection rather than a possession. And it's a small but important difference, right? You're coming to pick up your kids. Children need to have their basic and economic and psychological needs met. They need the support for maintaining family relationships in their lives that were important and meaningful to them before the divorce. They still need that. And research shows that they benefit most when the relationship between their parents is generally supportive and cooperative, and that the custody agreement includes free access to both parents. And what does that mean? It might mean that if your kids have something special that's going on with the other partner and it's not their weekend, that you might be flexible and allow them to continue to do that thing with the partner so that they can do this event or something. Or maybe they do that thing with the other partner and then they come back to you. Being flexible goes a long way in modeling and teaching our kids not only how to be flexible, but how to offer and operate in a spirit of generosity, how to interact with our co-parent in this unconditional positive regard, right? I have unconditional positive regard for the needs of my children and for the needs of my co-parent. And so we're going to be able to compromise with each other and be flexible with where the children are within reason. Will your kids benefit from this collaboration that we're talking about? When co-parenting has been successful, here's what you can expect from your older kids, right? When your kids grow up and you modeled this family system for your kids and they thrived in it, and you and your partner have done a good job of being there for the kids and being supportive in so many ways, they will have no trouble adapting to new cultures, new cities, new states, new countries. Whether they go away to college or at their in-laws' house, it won't feel awkward. They'll know how to fit in and they'll know how to adapt. They quickly and easily adjust to new jobs, right? Being in new situations or in things that are brand new for them doesn't seem to knock them off their feet. With different demands in the workplace, they tend to thrive. And it's second nature for them to learn quickly to read and assess new situations, to figure out how to work, how to get the job done. They figure out how to add value and add assets. Why? Because they've learned to do it in both of our homes, right? To the satisfaction of me and to the satisfaction of their other co-parent. Your children will likely be the ones that their friends turn to when they're in need of emotional insight and support. Because like so many other children of divorce become resilient and they succeed so many times where our culture expects them to fail. That's huge. Additionally, in my experience and that of researchers across the ideological spectrum, for example, living in two divergent cultures, two households, causes children to become self-reflective and autonomous thinkers, right? They learn to think for themselves. Each parent's point of view usually is considered and evaluated, and maybe they're even at odds with each other. But as a result, children quickly learn there are at least two valid points of view on almost every issue, right? Because on almost every issue, they might have heard two valid points of view. And they get to learn that it's up to me to decide which one makes the most sense for me. Because of this, children are forced to develop ethics and opinions of their own. They learn how to differentiate, right, for themselves from mom and dad, and they differentiate well based on their own perceptions and experiences. In the same way, in each household, these children are likely to be viewed and evaluated in different ways because their parents are different, right? As a result, these kids usually tend not to develop the self-image imposed on them by either parent, but instead develop a sense of identity that's uniquely their own. So I know that for me, I see these strengths and these talents in my son, and I might think, wow, you would be a really great, I don't know, mayor of a town. And my husband might be thinking, ex-husband, might be thinking, wow, you're really a good race car driver. Maybe you have a driver as an F1 Formula One driver in your future. Well, my son is listening to that and both of them sound really cool to him. But the truth is, he'll learn and develop his own voice. He will learn that that's what his dad thinks he should do. And I think that he should go into politics, for example. And he'll decide, yeah, I don't really want to do either. I want to do my own thing, get there much more rapidly. The clarity of a shared vision, becoming super friends. Most breakup couples have discovered that they have some irreconcilable differences in maybe their personalities, their lifestyle preferences, and sometimes their perception of reality. Sometimes you will agree, and sometimes one or both of you will be required to bend or meet in the middle, right? Compromise. However, when you commit to discovering what you can both do and what you can both stand on or stand behind, it's really a much smoother sailing for everyone, because you can then apply your agreements and your shared vision to the issues that are facing your family regarding custody and delegation of responsibility, time management, financial agreements. And all this is possible if you're approaching it from the viewpoint of, hey, we've got to learn to be friends or super friends for the sake of our kids. They need to have this spirit of friendliness, of fondness, and admiration present in our relationship so that they're not worried about us and they're not worried about what our disconnection means for them in their life. 3 family reorganization objectives that I think are important to know when you're trying to co-parent from this holistic place, this way that society doesn't yet fully understand, but that's really important, is to learn how to communicate again about your children and about all the things that have to do with your children, because your kids should recognize that they're more important than the conflict that ended your marriage or your relationship, and that they understand that your love for them will always prevail despite the changing circumstances that are happening within your family. And so 3 of those reorganization objectives are that the family remains a family, that the negative effects on children are minimized by reducing the ambiguity and avoiding enmeshing children in the divorce drama, right? A hard boundary. And that both ex-spouses integrate the divorce into their lives in a healthy way. This has to absolutely be an intentional conversation that says, hey, we both came to the decision. Maybe you brought it up first, maybe I brought it up first, but we both came to the decision that we're going to not be married anymore. We're not going to be in this long-term committed relationship anymore. And it means that we're no longer going to live together under the same roof. We have to deal with that on our own. We have to put that to the side and deal with that so that we can come together in this other uniquely and rewarding way. And so that the relationship, the piece of our relationship that didn't work, is no longer getting in the way of this really important task that we both decided to take on in raising and having children. Here are some family anchoring statements that are really helpful, because the actual move from one household to another, whether it happens every day or every few days or on certain weekends, is a really hard time for children to accept. Every reunion with one parent is also a separation with the other. And each hello is also a goodbye. And while those transitions are unavoidable, there are lots of things that we can do to help make it easier for them. And so some anchoring statements that I had posted around my house were to my child that says, I know I'm safe and loved by both of my parents, right? That was unequivocally the message that we gave our son. Parent, I'm a wise, loving, and courageous person who's committed to staying connected to the truth of who I am. And this is true, right? Especially if you are going to take on the task of becoming a partner in co-parenting and putting your kids first. You definitely are wise, you definitely are loving, and you definitely have courage to be able to do that. And as a couple, you can ground yourself in this. We're 2 good people with good hearts and noble intentions. We choose forgiveness, respect, caring, and gratitude for our relationship journey, and we honor all we learned from one another. We're committed to being a good team players and remaining a united front as parenting partners for our children. That's huge. And the family anchoring statement, we are and always will be a family that will care for one another. And this goes well beyond our children getting out of elementary and middle school and high school, right? It includes being that foundation, that familial foundation for your kids, even when they're in college. And then it goes on beyond that, even when they step out into the world and they're figuring out life on their own terms. It goes beyond even that when they begin to enter in long-term relationships, right? And introducing their potential partners to their family, right? It goes beyond that into their marriage, and maybe into them having children, and maybe into becoming grandparents. It's all part of keeping the family system together. Because the alternative is that Two parents show up for things at school, one parent's over there and one's over there, and you had to have a conversation about one parent about if they would come to this one, and you had to have another conversation with the other one to find out if they would be able to make it. And maybe when you're deciding what college, your kids are deciding what college to go to, they're having two different conversations instead of being able to have one conversation with their family and with their parents at the same time. They're having to introduce maybe their potential partner to two sets of their parents, right? You can see how this family anchoring statement goes on and on, should go on and on for perpetuity to keep our children feeling safe and secure in their family. It will be hard work and it will likely take all of your willpower, but your future self will thank you for your effort. This couldn't be more true. When co-parents who partner for the sake of their children feel so much better about the job that they've done, all the fears that they had when they were talking about the end of their relationship didn't happen, because co-parents who share a healthy relationship are also well aware of how important they both are to their children. They work hard to get to the point where they can work well with each other because they value their children's opportunity to know and spend time with the other parent. And even though it's hard sometimes, I'm sure they wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't have it any other way. How do we raise our children together? After a breakup, it isn't always obvious, especially if there's some hardship or some hurt, some grief, some shame, some bad feelings in the breakup. It's not always obvious to co-parents how they should move forward with being able to parent their children solo. Of course, if you look at the big picture, you'll still be raising your children together, but suddenly being the only adult on duty can be a little disorienting for both of you. Raising your kids in the same manner as you were before won't likely be an option if you're doing it from two different households. And so as you adjust to all the necessary changes, make sure that you both understand that parenting mistakes can and will happen. And it doesn't mean that you and your co-parent can't still be positive forces in your children's lives, right? That you have to have an abiding grace for one another and form those mistakes, and that you're keeping the prize before your eyes, that the children are the true winners here. When you're happier individually, it's a lot easier to co-parent with focus and intention. So that's what I would say is how you raise your children together, with a lot of focus and intention, and not with a lot of blame or hardship towards each other. This picture, I love it. It's a picture of his dad and his daughter. They're in the kitchen, and I would imagine that he's on the phone and he's on the phone talking to maybe the other co-parent, saying, we're trying to make your cookie recipe and we're making a mess here. We don't have it right. And he's trying to Google how to look up the recipe. And she's telling him, Dad, ask mom this. Family system. Mom is still present, and it's okay that she's present. It's okay with dad that she's present. And maybe it's putting a smile on her face that mom and dad are joking about the cookie recipe that they're trying to make.
Toya?
Yes.
I actually thought if you want to go 2 slides back, I actually think this might be a good opportunity to address a clarification that was requested from one of our attendees, because this is also on this slide. So I'll read it off for you real quick. One person, and it was mentioned earlier in the presentation, wanted some clarification about the picking up or dropping off situation of the contact between co-parents. So they asked, so if child lives with mother, she drops them to the father's house at the start of contact, please clarify.
Yes, that's what I'm suggesting, right? This may not always be physically possible or in terms of your schedule, but when we can drop off the kids, we are taking them to the other parent, right? As opposed to a parent dropping them off and then leaving. It's just a small thing that might make the difference in how your kids perceive this inevitable drop off pickup going to and from each other's house. It's a way of giving the child to the other parent instead of the child coming and taking away from one parent. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Toya.
You're welcome. Here, for some parents, it might be easier to think about your co-parent as a business partner, right? Um, Even if the parents aren't still coupled, they should still consider themselves on the same team, and they should still be working together to help their children thrive. And so sometimes it might be easier to think about this as, a business partner relationship, where the work that needs to be done in the co-parenting relationship has to do with, or sort of, you can think about it more as a act of function and transactions. To do this, parents need to be able to put a lot of the noise aside, no matter how loud and messy the breakup was or how different their parenting styles are, to work with each other even when they don't want to, right? They're just some things that people might be able to get their heads around if you're thinking about this as a business partnership. To be courteous, to always answer emails and text message and phone calls, not to badmouth your co-parent, especially not on social media or certainly to your children. To make sure that you do what you say you're going to do, not just for the sake of the children, right? The children need to be able to trust that you're saying that you're going to do what you're saying that you're going to do, but also each co-parent needs to be able to trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, and to be sure to communicate important information. There are lots of co-parenting apps, or you can use a spreadsheet where lots of important information lives, and that's shared so that each person can go either on the platform of the app or on the shared sheets or Excel sheet to communicate that information, update the information, add to the information, put your thoughts about information, provide requested documentation in a timely manner, and not to treat the other person as an enemy, but to model desirable contact, even if it means that for a period of time you're the only one modeling that behavior. And to demonstrate not just to your partner, but also to your family that you can be trusted and that you do not want to participate in a race to the bottom in terms of your behavior, right? So this speaks to, responding to maybe a partner's bad behavior or anger or hostility, right? It's important not to do that, just like you would at work. There are also, which are coming online more and more, or being more prevalent more and more, are co-parenting agreements. And I'm not necessarily talking about the co-parenting agreement that if you're going through a divorce, that the court might help you set up, right? That talks about visitation and who gets whom, when, where, and how. But this is about setting ground rules and being really explicit about the expectations when it comes to what this co-parenting situation is going to look like. If the plan you originally developed doesn't work well, please go back and work with your co-parent to adjust it as needed. And remember that the plan that you come up with works well when your child is maybe younger, and then has to be adjusted as your child grows up. If you are co-parenting older children, you could potentially ask them to help what would make them feel safer and secure and make them happier about the transitioning back and forth, or about what they'd like to see from both of their parents, right? So some of that has to do with following similar routines at each of your houses. For example, if homework at 5 p.m. after school is what's expected, then it would be a good idea to have that be the expectation at both houses. If bedtime is at 8 p.m., it would be great if bedtime was at 8 p.m. at both houses, so that the children don't have to get used to different expectations and different rules. I know at our house, a big one was no TV on school nights. And while it was hard, both of our households adopted to not having television at school nights, because at one house, when there was no television, then when the kids got to the other house, all they wanted to do was watch TV during the week. So we had to set mutual household rules. And the same was true for when our kids got old enough to do chores. And we also had to learn how to present a unified front when we were helping our kids understand certain things that might be applicable at one house and maybe not the other, or that might have been applicable at both houses. And part of this is making sure that everyone is clear about the childcare roles. For example, you might want to accept all the responsibility when your child is with you for your child and whatever their needs are. Or you might want to split those things or otherwise delegate some daily responsibilities, right? As a couples therapist, working with couples to come up with co-parenting agreements. And sometimes what's called a controlled separation, where both parents dwell in the same house and either stay in the same house in separate rooms and co-parent, or they rotate in and out of the house. They share some daily responsibilities because both of them might be in and out of the house every day, like taking the children to school every day, or getting them to their extracurricular activities, or making dinner for everyone to eat. Maybe for the people who are going to be, or the parent who's going to be on that evening to eat, but just helping out around the house. It could also happen if you're not living together, but there is a house that might be more of a hub for everyone. So this co-parenting agreement are some points to consider when developing a plan. Here are some additional co-parenting tips. Your children's needs come first. Prioritizing communication for effective co-parenting. Staying on the same page for the big stuff, right? And this might be when your kids are small: bedtime, screen time, playtime. When your kids get older, it might be, when can our kids learn to drive? Should we buy them a car? Are we going to let them go on their high school trip? Some of this might not seem like a big deal, but if your parenting styles are different while you were in your relationship, they're still going to be different when you're outside of your relationship. And so they'll need to be talked about. And so you might make an agreement that neither one of you will make a decision about big stuff until you've both had a chance to talk about it. And sticking to your parenting schedule as much as you can, with some flexibility if you need it. Remember the love that you had for one another at one point in time. You're going to need to channel that love. You're going to need to remember when, and sometimes you're going to need to act as if. Okay, I'm going to have to act as if I like my ex-partner more than I really do right now, for the sake of getting through this dinner or this play at school, so that my child isn't worried about trying to manage our dislike of each other, or whatever is happening between us. I'm going to act as if, right? Being aware that your children will eventually gain a realistic view of both of you as they become adults. They're going to remember how hard it was for you to be around each other, or how easy it was for you to be around each other. If your co-parent is truly a bad person, your children will come to that realization on your own. And so it should be something that they find out on their own, and not because of how you treat them, because the truth might be that how you treat them is a result of the relationship, and that the co-parent isn't a bad person at all. Co-parenting tip number 6, make an effort to be positive. And this has to do with training yourself to maintain a positive outlook, which can be great for your own health and your own well-being. But it's also huge for your children because it makes them feel safe. And like they too can speak freely and speak well of the parent that isn't present, and not hurt your feelings. Co-parenting tip number 7, empathy first. In the early days of family separation, sometimes it's hard to be empathetic towards your co-parent. So we direct our empathy towards the children, but before you act, ask yourself how your children will perceive things. If you're about to call up your co-parent, for example, and vent about the late child support payment, imagine that you're your child and you're listening to that conversation. And imagine their reaction to be a witness to that type of conversation and that type of agreement. That should be enough to stop you from making that call or from saying those things. So lead with empathy. Co-parenting tip number 8, self-care is required. There are going to be times when the children aren't with you, and those are good times to practice self-care. It's a very challenging time. Not only do our kids need our support to move through the transitions, but so do we. And so taking a few minutes each day for self-care is paramount. This can be in the form of positive self-talk, or exercising, or massage therapy, yoga, right? Hanging out with friends, anything that reminds you that you're a valuable person and a good parent, even if the family dynamic is now changing. Sometimes when we experience a split in our relationship, there's a lot of shame and guilt involved. And it's important that we work through that. And it's also good for our children to see us doing small things for ourselves, especially with self-care, because it helps us to engage and realign with who we really are and what we want out of life. Number 9, be smart about new partners. As our co-parenting relationship evolves, it's really good to have an explicit conversation so that we agree on the roles of new partners in our family system and the role that new partners might have with our children. Many family therapists recommend that until new partners have a secure place in the family structure, they shouldn't be involved in any of the mutual child rearing decisions, and that they shouldn't communicate with the ex-partner on matters related to the children. But over time, as the co-parents develop a better relationship, that might be possible, or it might be okay, depending on how the new partners can best contribute to the decision that affect the children. New partners in a relationship can be sticky, right? If the children are really struggling with the split or the divorce, it should really be held back some if one or both of you are dating, so that you're focusing on the family system and not asking your children to make another adjustment or to transition to another thing that's happening to them. Tip number 10, find forgiveness. Forgiveness is powerful, and it often takes a strong person to forgive. When you're ending a love relationship, it's probably not at the top of your to-do list. But once you're further away from the split, work on forgiving yourself and your former spouse for the decision that happened to physically break up your family, your nuclear family, and turning it and that caused it to turn into a bi-nuclear family. It'll help you in healing, and it'll show the children a powerful lesson about how resilient families can be. That's the end of my presentation. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask or comments about the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Toya. So we have one person who headed out, but they just wanted you to know, thank you, Toya. This was really lovely. And we do have one anonymous question that I'll read out to you right now. The question reads, what if the other parent is difficult? How do you overcome that? And if both parents do get on but are divorced and don't live together, will that not confuse the children?
So the first part of the question was, what if one parent is, not really cooperative or hard to get along with? Sometimes that happens. And so it's important to be mindful about how we show up and how we engage with that parent. And hopefully we're using, our softness, our empathy and our compassion to help that other parent, maybe acknowledge the feelings. I know you're hurt. I know you're angry. I know this isn't, what you wanted, or maybe it is, I'm not sure. but to help them to refocus back on what's best for the children and keep the conversations maybe short and say it would be great if you could join us out for dinner and that we could get along for the sake of the kids. To have those conversations, right? To begin to create a safe space, maybe in therapy. I do that, and I'm sure many couples therapists do that, where they work with both people to help them get to the place where they can co-parent in a more successful way. The other part of the question had to do with, what was it again, AJ?
Yeah, so the other part of the question reads, if both parents do get on, but are divorced and don't live together, will that not confuse the children?
Yeah, unless you've decided to do what's called nesting, which is where both people stay in the house, right? No, or no, where you maintain the family home and you get an apartment or another house somewhere and the parents rotate in and out of the house so the children don't have to leave. The children will still know that you're not in the same house and that you're not living as husband and wife or as mommy and daddy anymore. So you do have to restructure what it means to be a family with your children. There's no two ways about that. You will have to deal with the hardship and the hurt or the struggle and the pain that will cause your children. The hope is that both parents are working with the children to help them understand that. And by showing up together, with the children, that they see that, yes, while my parents may not be in relationship in the same way they were, I still have access to both my parents. I still have family time where all of us are together. And so while, I can't rest knowing that both of my parents are asleep together in the same room, I know that I'm around both of my parents and that they like each other. So it's one less thing that kids have to worry about or deal with.
Great, thank you, Toya. Yeah,
Mhm.
we have just about 1 minute left. So if any of you would like to ask any question or give any feedback to Toya about her presentation, we'd love to hear it. I'll give you just 1 minute here.
I want to say thank you all for joining. I know this was in the middle of your day, and it means everything to me that you would join to learn a little bit about what it's like to co-parent in a more family-centered way. It isn't always possible, but boy, if we can do anything to make it possible, it's a win, not only for the kids, but it's also a win ultimately for, the feelings of the relationship between both co-parents. Thank you all for joining.